Welcome to the Duckpin Podcast with your host, Brian Griffiths. And now, here's Brian.
In our world of corporate-based journalism these days, we're getting a lot of journalism that is based not on what benefits the local community, but what benefits the national community. And our guest tonight is doing something that is the complete opposite of that, with hyper-local news coverage and reporting. Joining us on this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast, the publisher, founder of Annapolis, John Frenaye. John, thanks for joining me this week.
Hey, Brian, thank you very much. And first of all, before we get even going, I need to apologize to you because we recorded a podcast just before the Duckpin launched, and life happened and everything it was just a nightmare for us. And we never got the ability to throw it out, but we will redo another one and put it out.
Yeah, we'll redo another one. We'll just chalk it up to 2020. And everything else that's gotten waylaid by 2020, we'll just chalk that up to that as well.
Oh, that's for sure.
So Annapolis, your blog, or your news site rather, Annapolis.net. And you've been going strong for a long time, over 10 years now.
Yep.
Kind of tell us kind of what the genesis of Annapolis was, what led you to start it, and kind of how the setup process was when you started setting up. Because back in 2009, I mean, that was a completely different universe ago, before really kind of hyper-local news sites like yours really started to prop up.
It was before, it was before the patches had come and gone and any of the other number ones. It actually got started on a dare, believe it or not.
All the best stories start with a dare.
Either that or a beer, one of the two. But, but no, what had happened is that I had worked, I used to own several travel agencies, and I did some leisure reporting with MSNBC, and I learned what they used to call new media at the time. And I learned it from a lot of people there. And when I sold my travel agencies, I was still doing some, part-time stuff with MSNBC. And I was working there was a guy that had a blog and said, hey, can you help me monetize it and get some? And I told him everything that MSNBC had taught me, and never happened. He never did anything with it. And I asked him, I said, what's the deal with it? And he says, I just realized that you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, okay, well, I wasn't telling you anything it wasn't my ideas. I was telling you what the experts said. And then he said the fateful words is, yeah, well, I've got like 300 people a month that look at me, so I'd like to see what you could do. And that afternoon I had the domain, and it started out initially as Crime in Annapolis. I realized that was too pigeonholed. And then we just went on to Annapolis. And even though Anne Arundel County is more the focus, Annapolis was a little bit easier to spell because people be Arundel. What's that?
Even people who live here have trouble with the Arundel sometimes. So from those humble beginnings, you started on a dare, and now you're reporting basically every day of the week with local news that's going on in Anne Arundel County. Talk a little bit about the growth of the site over time, some of those challenges that you faced. I mean, back in 2009, and I faced the same challenges too. People didn't really know what a blog was. People didn't know what new media was. It was very hard to try to even explain what it is that we were trying to do there. So kind of run through some of the challenges that you faced as you were starting to get the ball rolling with Annapolis.
Well, I mean, I knew what a blog was. I knew what we needed to do to get it there. And I knew I wanted to focus on something that would be manageable for me. I don't want to say unemployed, but I had sold my businesses and was trying to figure out what my next step was going to be. And so I didn't want to get into the employee thing or everything else like that. What I did is I said, let's get this. I made my connections. I mean, I had some connections in town. So I, made my connections, say, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. And we just started. And initially we contacted some nonprofits and said, hey, let me share your news. What's going on with you? I don't want to know about your new printer or the new phone system that you got. But I mean, if you've got a new board member or something else, then let's talk about them. It moved into the city, it moved into the county, not as much the state. And we still don't do a whole lot of state reporting. And it just really took off from there. Hadn't really thought about monetizing it or anything like that. My first advertiser was Josh Cohen, former mayor of Annapolis. And he called me up and said, hey, he says, how much would you charge to advertise? And I was like, hadn't thought about that. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, $50 until you lose. And it was during a primary. And he said, okay, deal. And so that's Josh was my very first client. He ended up making it through the primary. So I took him through the general election at $50. And at that point, then some other people started to take notice and asked about advertising. Then I said, okay, well, I need to really figure out whether this can work. Developed a business plan, developed a marketing plan, went out, and we've just sort of grown, grown from there. I don't think I got very greedy. We've had very few any kind of advertising price increases. I'm a firm believer in all business starts on Main Street, and I don't care whether Main Street's up in Pasadena, or down in Annapolis or in South County. And it needs to be. I mean, we're small and we're local, and we shop there, we eat there, and it needs to be affordable. And that was sort of the mantra that I go through even today.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Is that so many so many sites like that lose their focus. Not to pick on the voice newspapers here in Anne Arundel County, but every once in a while they get a little too far removed and start talking about kind of state issues, which is kind of not necessarily their bailiwick. People, when they're getting these papers, they're looking for hyper-local news. You've been able to stay in that swim lane. Now, was that a conscious decision that you had to make, or is that just kind of the way things evolved over time?
Yes and no. Honestly, I would love to work in the state realm. I just don't have the resources or the time myself. Okay, this was me from day one, day two, on. We had some stringer photographers and that helped us out periodically, and some people that would contribute content occasionally. But covering the state really has to be a full-time job. You have to have somebody that's there to be able to go into the State House to be able to talk to this. I mean, we've done podcasts with Governor Hogan, we've done them with Lieutenant Governor Rutherford and whatnot, but they were more general topics. I had 3 kids in college, so I needed to figure out how to do it. I wasn't willing to take a huge risk to turn around and bring on employees and say, okay, I need to pay somebody, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 to be in the State House at the risk of this whole thing collapsing. And I just didn't want to take that risk. So that's really sort of by necessity. We kept local.
Yeah, I think people really kind of underestimate how much money there is to be made, or overestimate rather, how much money there is to be made in new media, and how much cost there were. When we were doing Red Maryland, it was always amazing. People thought that that was our full-time gig and that we didn't do anything else. And I think people really overestimate how much money people are willing to pay for a click, or how much people are willing to pay for a podcast listen.
Yeah.
So kind of take us through kind of your business day, if you will, regarding Eye on Annapolis. Kind of like, walk through the day of how you formulate, what gets on there, how you sift through the good stuff and the bad stuff. Really, the day starts with, and we haven't even talked about this yet, the day starts with the daily news brief, which is a daily podcast, 10 minutes or so in length, that hits the news and weather and a couple of other things in both Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. Right. I don't have the stamina to do a podcast 5 days a week. I barely have the stamina to do one half the time. And, you're starting with that, and then you are just, keeping updating stuff throughout the day. So just kind of walk people through what kind of your work day, so to speak, looks like as it relates to Eye on Annapolis.
Well, typically, I mean, there's fluffy news and there's real news. Okay. And so we've got 2 different piles that I work with there. And what we do is we look at 3 posting times, if you will, 3 publishing times, usually in the 10 a.m. hour, 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. hour, and 4 p.m. hour. And, stuff that comes in from perhaps the Hospice of the Chesapeake or a new business or something like this, this is not real time sensitive. So what we'll do is I'll schedule that. We'll get in there, we'll edit it, we'll turn around, we'll make sure that we have the images that we possibly, that we can get, and we'll schedule it out. Okay. That, if it's a grand opening for a store, that is time sensitive, but if it's, just, hey, this winter, we're going to have the whatever thing highlighted, that can be scheduled out in a week from now. So typically I try to schedule that stuff 2 to 3 weeks out in advance. So if I were to drop dead tomorrow, this thing will go for 3 posts a day for 3 weeks, and it'll be fine. Breaking news as it comes in. If we talk about the police, or if there's a water main break, or a bad accident, or just whatever may come on, the mayor, the county executive, certainly COVID's played a big role of it in the last year. That gets put out pretty much as soon as we can get to it. And sometimes I'm out and about, and I don't get to it for a couple hours. That's fine. And that's pretty much how it does. Throughout the day, I sort of cultivate what I'm thinking about for the daily news brief, which is a podcast we launched probably, I think we did it in September. So we've probably been 3 years and a couple of months now. And just, usually I'll have a list of about 7 or 8 stories by the end of, at the end of the night. And I'll look and I'll say, okay, well, these ones should make it. And I try to make it about 10 minutes. I don't promise. And before we started recording, we sort of laughed and said, this is great because, it can be 20 minutes. It can be an hour long. It doesn't matter. And, come the morning, I turn around and look and see if, pardon the language, if any shit hit the fan overnight, and add that in there and let it go.
Yeah, you also have a weather, have a weather feature that's in there as well. You've got a financial feature on Mondays. You've got the Maker's Minute on Thursdays. You've got these other segments throughout, either every day when it comes to weather, or throughout the week. So it gives some people additional things to listen to, and it's additional content that you don't have to produce.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, typically on Monday we've got a financial thing with Covington Alsena. Tuesday we don't have anything, and we're working on getting a leadership segment from somebody from the Naval Academy. Wednesday is open, and people said I should get more into the rants and opinion things, but you
can't force that.
I mean, it needs to hit you. You need to
come
in and kick the cat and say, okay, I'm going to sit down and tap away at the keyboard. Thursday we have our Maker Minutes, and Friday, pre-COVID, we used to have, what do you want to do this weekend? Now it's just like, hey, it's Friday, sit at home.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of, I see your Facebook and the Twitter and everything else like that. And in a normal time period, you are all over the place when it comes to local events. I know you've gotten to go, you've gotten to sit in the press box at Navy games this year, which I know is a cool deal. But so much of what you do, both in, what you personally do in going out and about to events, and also a lot of what gets covered, both on Friday and what you do this weekend, and and a lot of the other things that you write about, all that's kind of gone away all year. How much of a struggle has that kind of been, not just for the blog, but for kind of you personally? It kind of changes your entire way of life almost, to a certain extent, more so than maybe other people.
It's not me, Brian. It's everybody. I mean, this is nothing unique to me by any means. But, and it did. I mean, we did have some advertisers that were event focused. And, that all just started to evaporate, in March of 2020. And just by one they dropped. And it's really disappointing. That's, hopefully it's going to come back again a little bit in mid 2021. And, Annapolis is just such a great area for events, whether it be out at Sandy Point. I mean, we even go up north in Baltimore. We've got the Preakness. We had the Grand Prix for a while. And I'd like to say that the areas that we cover is, if you were to take a map of Anne Arundel County and take that blur tool on Photoshop and just sort of widely blur the outline of the county. So if something's, we do the Bowie Bay Sox. They didn't have a season this year, but they're technically in PG County. Whereas Rusher and Baker said, no, it's Prince George's County.
Yeah, you gotta watch that. But I mean, it's also, for people who know where Bowie is, I mean, it's also barely in Prince George's County. I mean, it's literally a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Patuxent and the Anne Arundel County line.
Right, but a lot of what we do is event focused, and we do have a Friday newsletter that goes out with typical, hey, here's some stuff that you may want to consider, and it's a lot of it's gone virtual, and I'm really impressed with a lot of the people, whether it be, Ram's Head is doing some virtual stuff, and all of the artists that went on. There was a Facebook page that jumped up I don't want to say out of nowhere, but it jumped up very early, called Annapolis Streaming, which had all of these artists that were sitting at home playing their guitars and singing it, in front of their fireplace or on their couch. And they would put a Venmo thing up, say, hey, give me a tip. And it really helped them.
Yeah, no, and I think that the people have been very resilient when it comes to that sort of thing. 2021 is going to be an interesting year, not just because we still have the pandemic that's going on, but also because we have an election in Annapolis.
I know, I'm excited. Now that's where I really do get into it, because nobody else really gets into really super local elections. Nobody really cares. And that's really where I think you do need to care. Honestly, whether it's, President Trump or, President-elect Biden, I mean, what they're doing is not really going to impact my day-to-day life, but County Executive Pittman's going to have to fix my potholes, and Mayor Buckley is going to have to, figure out why my water's bill so high.
Or create new cycling hazards in the city of Annapolis too. But I mean, that's the thing though, is the fact that, and this is, and you and I have talked about this before. One of my biggest frustrations, not just with politics, but with life, is the fact that so many people focus on this big, high 40,000 foot stuff instead of focusing on the local issues. When, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, doesn't matter who's president, they're not going to arrest criminals in the fourth ward. They're not going to fix the flooding issues down at City Dock. They're not going to deal with cycling on Main Street or any of those other things. I mean, those are where the rubber's really hitting the road. And based, with coverage being driven by national news, all of that local stuff gets lost in the sauce. And that's where a site like yours comes in.
It does. And I really love the local elections. And next year, the mayor is up for elections as well as all of the aldermen. We're in an off election year. And, what we'll do is we'll talk to all of the alderman candidates, find out, hey, what's their deal? What's their expectation? What do you think the problems are in your specific wards? And we're going to do the same thing with the mayor. And then, again, in 2022, we're going to be doing the same thing with county executive as well as the county council.
Yeah, and that's where things really just are so important. And there's the more local coverage that we get, the better. Over the years, how much flack, if any, have you gotten from people who say, well, you're not actually the news, you're not actually the media? I mean, I know that I've gotten a lot of that grief over time. How much have you run into over the years, and how much has that changed from 2009 to now?
Well, I do get it occasionally. And I think with now more than a decade of being around, it's like, okay, well, he's not leaving. Okay, invite him to the adults table. I don't know what it is. But I don't portray myself as a journalist. Okay. I didn't go to school for journalism. Similarly, when I take photographs, I call them snapshots. I don't consider myself a photographer. And those photographers are artists. They know exactly what they're looking for. They've got great eyes. Journalists are journalists and whatnot. I do try to follow all the tenets of good journalism. I do know what they are. And, we go from there. I mean, do I get it wrong sometimes? Absolutely. Do I screw up? And yeah, and I've been called out on that. Sometimes it's just really sort of frustrating. And I'm like, okay, whatever. If you don't, you've got an issue with me, okay, fine. You've got an issue with me. I don't really have one for you. And I've always felt that the journalism community, whether it be, on the, citizen journalism, some guy running around downtown with a cell phone camera, or somebody that's more in the middle like myself, and the Capitol, and even, you get into the television broadcast, can all certainly operate in the same ecosystem and really help one another. I know when Patch was around, I was always saying, okay, I'm sort of a hit and run guy. I can sit there and say, hey, there's a wreck out on this road, go a different way. And I'm done. And Patch will come in and say, hey, it was a green car. It rolled over 3 times and it hit BG&E pole 1, 2, 3, and the power is out.
Right.
And then the Capitol can come in and say, oh, well, the guy was drunk. He blew a 2.3 and he's had 3 other DUIs and, was behind on his child support. And through everybody, you've got that whole picture brought in together. And,
yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
I don't think we need to be enemies. And I mean, I find, that there are some, and there's competition. We are, which is fine. Everybody needs competition.
Starting the Daily News Brief podcast, what was kind of the impetus for that? I mean, there's nothing like it anywhere in the state of Maryland. And I'm just wondering what kind of led you to go down that route?
Well, podcasting was something that was not really in my wheelhouse, if you will. And my friend Tim Hamilton and I started the Maryland Crabs podcast, which is somewhat on a bit of a hiatus. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do with that. But basically, I started that with him just to shut him up about it because he wanted to do it. And I said, okay, fine, I've got the time, let's do it. And I got a little bit proficient in figuring out how to do it. And then I became a fan of listening to the New York Times The Daily, which has morphed as a podcast over the last couple of years, from daily news to more of their opinions of what's going on in politics. And I said, that's something that we could probably use here and see what we can do. And I turned around, I said, okay, I want it to be about 10 minutes because I hate to be pigeonholed into saying, okay, it must be done within 10 minutes, because if there's enough stuff going on, I can turn around and make it 15. I think the longest we've gone is 20. And we've been as short as like 6 or 7 when there's not much there to talk about. And it just works. We have about 14,000 people that get it each day, delivered to their device. And then there's additional stuff that's, we cross-posted over into Facebook and onto the website. And there's some additional listens that come there. And we have, I think, one or two that even listen to us on YouTube.
You mentioned Facebook there for a second. I think that for anybody who is a content publisher, Facebook is our friend and our enemy. Because so many times people are like, well, don't want to click the damn link. How often do people like on your Facebook page just kind of start commenting on the story, or just it's very clear that nobody ever actually clicked the link?
Oh, it happens all the time. People, it's the keyboard warriors, and they do it. I mean, you look at it at the Capitol all the time, and I mean, let's be real. I mean, we are looking to try to make some money. I've got bills to pay and everything else. So, I mean, you do get, I don't want to say a misleading headline, but I mean, I'm not as good as I probably should be, but you want to get an enticing headline that says, oh, hey, I need to find out what this is all about. I mean, I don't want to, sit there and say, Paris Hilton spotted downtown when it was, somebody else. But you get it all the time. And, when those people go off on like that, I typically don't engage with them. It's just like, no, I mean, if you don't have, and I don't have a paywall. I mean, you see that all the time on the Capitol. People are like, oh my God, why can't I read the thing? I'm like, well, pay the $9 a month or whatever it is, because the Capitol is well worth it. It really is. Because you couldn't read Brian Griffith's column in the Capitol if you didn't.
People got to pay for that paywall. I mean, that money ain't going to make itself for me. What little it is. Long term, where do you see Ion Annapolis being in 5 years? Do you think you'll still be doing this? You think it's something you're going to hand off to somebody else at some point? Do you think it will continue to grow? Do you think it will continue to grow financially?
I don't know. Maybe, possibly, and yes. I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. I enjoy it. I don't feel that I'm burning out and tiring down. Can somebody else do it? Absolutely. I think what I've done can be replicated in any number of places. I am actually set up to replicate it in other places if I can find the right person to do it. And I mean, it does take a commitment. And getting off initially, I was fortunate enough that I sold my businesses that I had. I didn't need money immediately. But if you got somebody that has a spouse that could, front them for a little bit, or you could get by with a very little bit, it's very, easily replicated. And I still think there's a future. I think we keep an eye to technology and what's out there. I mean, we've added the podcast. I would love to get into video, some more of the live stuff. We're going to try next year at Navy football and try to see if I can get into a sort of a live broadcast. And it might be live 3 or 4 different segments that get put up. But you just keep an eye and see what's out there and go from there. I mean, if somebody wants to buy me, I'm always for sale. Hey, Baltimore Sun, I'm talking to you. But, no, I mean, it's and if it falls out, it falls out. But I don't think it does, because I think people do like it. I mean, I go back to the Capitol where when Ed Casey was still the editor, and they lost a little bit of that focus. I remember him saying that it was like, no, you want to put little Timmy on the front page, toting his wagon and selling his apples, or, whatever it's the local story. And the Capitol does certainly cover all sorts of local stuff, but I think that they brought a lot of the national stuff in and it somewhat loses a little bit of the local character. And I think I pick up a little bit of that slack.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with the Sun buying the Capitol all those years ago. If folks want more information about Ion Annapolis, I know the website's ionannapolis.net. Where else can they go?
You could go to Facebook, which is All Annapolis. We also have a Facebook called Ion Annapolis. We did a little bit of A/B testing to see which one would resonate better, and the All Annapolis did. You can contact me by email. It's John, JOHN, at ionannapolis.net. The Daily News Brief, we've got the newsletter. You can call me. The phone numbers are up there. Text me, whatever it is. That'll work, and I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody. And if you got any, tips or stories, always welcome. Or if you've got any news, and again, like I said, I don't care about your new photocopier or the new telephone system that you just installed. But if you're doing something cool in your business or in your work, let it know, because I mean, there's so many people that are doing so many great things in this county that, you don't know. And the capital, and I don't have the bandwidth, and the capital doesn't have the bandwidth. None of us have the bandwidth to cover them all.
Yeah, amen to that. John Frenaye, the publisher of Annapolis, we'll get you on again sometime during the 2021 Annapolis election cycle to talk about the real fun stuff.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, John, take care. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian.
This has been the Duckpin Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and download